any of you know me personally, you probably know that sometimes I can be a little bit too hard on myself, and that's not necessarily like the most easy thing for me to admit, but it really is probably one of the most true things. I have like unreasonable expectations of myself sometimes, and just because I've learned a lot of things, I expect myself to retain all that knowledge at all times and not be a human, almost like a robot. I used to wish I was a robot when I was a kid. It's really weird. But I think it's funny because oftentimes we start to treat ourselves as like less than when we start spiraling in an old pattern. We don't treat ourselves with the kind of compassion that we really deserve because, yes, we're unlearning things. We're learning new ways of being. You know, we're actually rerouting the neural networks of our brain in order to be serving us better, which is, you know, moving in from the fork in the road, you know, moving down a positive path rather than a negative direction, right? And sometimes, just because we've read a lot of books or watched a lot of YouTube videos or, you know, talked to a lot of spiritual people and done a lot of metaphysical training and blah, 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 and of course I'm talking about me here, I think the funniest thing is that when we're in the midst of it and we don't have access to that, like, frequency of knowledge, right? Let me start talking in the I word sense. I don't tend to give myself that leniency of being forgiving to myself.
The Buddha said, "Whoever has done harmful actions but later covers them up with good is like the moon which, freed from the clouds, lights up the world." To begin with, guilt is an emotion, a momentary emotion. It's the indicator that you have done something which you do not want to repeat. The emotion of guilt, in a momentary sense, is meant to tell you that you do not wish to repeat something, and that something you did or said is out of line with your higher self. We call this indicator of your internal knowing conscience. Conscience can bring your attention to ways in which you are out of line with your integrity, fighting against your higher self. It can make you aware that you are doing something that is hurtful to yourself or others, or something that is not honoring yourself or the universe at large.
I don't tend to give myself that leniency of being forgiving to myself. I tell everybody else to be forgiving of yourselves and, you know, have compassion and love and gentleness towards yourself, right? But I was really observing myself today, and I noticed that that is sometimes absent from me most of the time. And I was kind of taken aback by that when I actually started paying attention to that.
Conscience, which is a function of the higher self, is absent of regret. It sees every single thing which happens as an integral part of expansion. And yes, even things like the Holocaust. Let's pretend you're in a building. Guilt is like the tear gas which has been released, filling up the building. Regret is how you know that anger and self-blame has entered the building and is preventing you from leaving the building. It's keeping you imprisoned in that tear gas. It's keeping you inside the suffering of that original thing, the tear gas, which was meant to make you go away in the opposite direction of the tear gas. Regret introduces guilt for the things that have happened in the past, which you've already acknowledged are not things that you want to repeat. which is the very purpose of conscience. Once you have acknowledged this, the emotion of guilt serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever. Its only purpose is to help you discern what you would prefer, to discern that what you have done is not in line with what you want to do. Once that step occurs, there is no value in it universally whatsoever.
And I was like, wow, I'm a hypocrite. I am sorry, but this is really challenging stuff sometimes. And I was just faced with myself and how I probably come off as arrogant sometimes because, you know, here I'm saying one thing and living another, and that's not the way it should be. So in all authenticity, I know what it's like. I know it's hard. You have that self-talk going on, and you have all the doubts and all the fears and everything creeping up. And I know that sometimes you don't have access to those resources. You know, it's a freaking hard process to get through, especially when you've been so steeped in a misery paradigm, and you've been so steeped in ways of being that are self-defeating.
It does not keep you moving in the direction of positive change. It keeps you trapped in guilt. We have an issue in English language. Quite often we have a minimal amount of words to convey what we're describing. That's why when we usually use the word guilt, we're not actually referring to the momentary emotion of guilt. So when I am going to talk about guilt throughout this video, I'm not referring to the momentary emotion, which is a function of conscience. I'm not referring to guilt as it stands as this moment, this emotion is indicating that something that I've done or said is out of line with my higher self. When I refer to guilt throughout this video, I'm referring to the self-regulation system of blame and of self-punishment or self-abuse that keeps you locked in this emotion that we call guilt. So it's the regulation of self-blame and self-punishment that I'm going to be calling guilt throughout this video. Step 1 to letting go of guilt is realization. Understand what guilt is. Understand how it begins. Understand what it does. You have to have the realization that it is causing harm and not good before you are able to release guilt. You have to realize that guilt is not serving your highest good. It is self-abuse. Realize that guilt and shame are negative emotions that are fueled by negative thoughts, and they do not help you go in the direction of where you want to go. Step 2. Decide you are ready, wanting, and willing to let go of guilt. As much as guilt may be the one shred of evidence causing you to feel your own goodness, you have to be willing to let go of it because it's doing more harm than it is good. I say this all the time, but we have to be ready and willing to let go of something before we're actually going to let go of it. So that decision is paramount to letting go of guilt.
It's hard. It's fucking hard. I'm not gonna lie, it's just hard. But it helps, you know, so much when you have people around you who can put up with you. To put it frankly, you know, you can read all the self-help books and all the self-development books you want, but ultimately it's relationships that are going to help change you, because it's the relationships that you can fall back on even when you're at your worst. You know, Marilyn Monroe, she said, if you can't love a girl at her worst, you don't deserve her at her best. And I think that that's true with all friendships and everything, you know, because we're all humans and we're all just doing the best we can with the tools that we've been given by society, the things that we've learned from our families, our parents. And anybody who's on a betterment path, you know, anybody who's on a spiritual path, we're all trying to, you know, be more self-aware.
Step 3 is, replace the belief that you deserve punishment and you deserve to suffer and that you don't deserve happiness and you don't deserve love with the belief that you deserve to be loved and to be happy. To do this, you can look back at the video which I've made about how to change a belief. Start working on those beliefs. The subject of deserving is really a video in and of itself, and so be on the lookout for that because I'm going to do a video on deserving in the future. Step 4. Take responsibility only for what is your responsibility in a situation. Taking responsibility is not shame, it is understanding. It is not owning up to the blame for what happened. It's owning up to the responsibility to change in the future. In other words, it's owning up to the responsibility of saying or doing or thinking something differently in the future and thus changing future events. 5. Take off the rosy-colored sunglasses when you are looking for ways that the past could have been different. Guilt is fueled by looking back on a situation and seeing options that either weren't there or which we had no access to at the time. It's easy to look back on a situation which occurred in the past with the benefit of our current knowledge. I'm going to use an example of someone who I've counseled in the past with guilt to demonstrate what I mean by using rosy-colored glasses to look back at the past. There is a woman I counseled whose husband was an alcoholic. When she puts on her rosy-colored retrospective glasses, she thinks, if only I'd gotten him into treatment, the marriage could have been saved and everything would have been rosy. So she comes to the conclusion that she had obviously been too weak or stupid to get her husband the treatment he needed, and like a bad, bad wife, she is responsible for ending the marriage. And, of course, is responsible for depriving her children of a father. Here is what her rosy-colored retrospective glasses will not let her see. 1. She didn't know that her husband was an alcoholic until they'd been divorced for several years. She just thought that he drank a lot. 2. Even if she had known, her husband would never have consented to treatment at that time. In fact, his willingness to undergo rehab several years later was in no small part due to the fact that he had lost his entire family. In other words, he had to go through this journey on his own at his own pace in order to be ready to release his own pain. Her leaving might have actually saved his life. Looking back, she sees the option of reconciliation. The fact that she had tried again and again to make the marriage work before finally, and only after having exhausted every other option she could think of, decided to leave. That has gotten blocked out by the rosy-colored hindsight glasses. But the truth is that the option of making it work was no longer on the table at the time that she got divorced. When she got her divorce, the idea of therapy was not public. It was something you did only if you were insane or at least completely unable to function in normal society. It was not something which was considered normal for people to do. So, the idea of therapy hadn't even occurred to her at the time. The truth is that the option of therapy, as it stands today, simply didn't exist back then. She is feeling guilty for not choosing options that weren't actually there at the time. She is holding herself responsible for knowing what she didn't know. No one can win with those expectations. The bar is literally unreachable. This is the perfect breeding ground for guilt. Look back at what you're using your rosy-colored sunglasses to see, and start refuting the evidence you've come up with. In other words, look for ways to refute the if-onlys. Apologize to anyone that you feel like you've hurt in the past, especially if this person is yourself. If you offer a sincere apology, that can bring you a long way towards releasing the resistance you have towards your actions and words in the past. It's really hard to let go of guilt when someone else is hurting. So offer a sincere apology where you make it understood what you would have done different had you known what you know now. If the person or animal or thing is not around to apologize to, or if you simply don't feel like you're ready to address them, then you can take a piece of paper out and write down a letter to them expressing your apologies. And then you can go outside somewhere that's safe and you can burn this message. And as you watch it burn, you can reaffirm to yourself, I am ready to let go of this self-punishment and self-blame and move in the direction of something that's different. And state what it is you're ready to move in the direction of. State your new intention.
So with all that said, it's kind of funny because I'm aware of how human I am. And it's not always the easiest thing to come to terms with. Because oftentimes we want to escape our humanness and run away from it. And, try to transcend it, or try to get away from it, or try to ignore it. But this humanness, our anger, our sadness, our frustrations, they're all so tender, and they are a part of us, And I feel like they deserve to be met fully wherever we're at, Like, today I really learned that there's nothing to feel guilty about. No emotion, no action, really.
Now that I've lost track of the bullet points that we're on, we're back to number 7. So hopefully you can fill in the blanks as to what the previous steps were. I'm sorry I didn't mention the numbers. But step 7 is, make a new plan for how you will do things in your life now and in the future. If you don't have a new plan for how you will behave differently the next time, it's really hard to change your behavior. You might keep making the same mistake over and over again. This is making a subconscious process conscious. Guilt exists to tell you what you would prefer to do or say. And so to make this conscious, you want to really look for what it is that the guilt is telling you that you should do or say. The point of letting go of guilt is not to accumulate more guilt. It's to allow yourself to start fresh with a new perspective. 8. Recognize the value in mistakes. Unless you knew what you don't want, you would not know what you want. Unless you knew what didn't work, you would not know what does work. And so mistakes are incredibly valuable to this universe. The universe would not have a world free of mistakes, because mistakes are integral to the expansion not only of you, but of this universe. When mistakes turn into suffering is when we make mistakes part of blame and self-punishment. We introduce shame and self-punishment into the equation of a mistake instead of understanding and taking it as a lesson.
Whatever we do to somebody else is just a reflection of how we're treating ourselves. And whatever we do to somebody else is we're doing 10 times worse to ourselves. So I just want to leave that with you today, because I've been rambling for a little bit, but I've just come to so many little ahas that I just want to share it all. But it's one of those things where the insights are still percolating and they're still incubating in my mind, and I just feel like a lot of layers of my perception of myself have just kind of dropped today. We have these fixed ideas of who we are and what we look like, and who we are to other people, and we have these fixed set of patterns that we like to operate within in order to get a desired result on the outside world. But what the funny thing is when our subconscious mind peeks through, or some other part of ourself, Freud liked to call it the id, when it starts slipping out and it starts creating its own patterns of behavior, we're used to damnation and condemnation from people. Oh, how dare her yell at me, how dare her, she's not supposed to say that, that's wrong, that's bad, that's evil, that's demonic. We're used to being criticized and chastised for these other aspects of ourselves. But when you meet somebody who can embody, unconditioned presence and unconditioned love, that's a powerful thing, because that's godly. That is what it means to love people.
9. Discover all of the assumptions and judgments that you're making based on the situation which is causing you to feel guilt. A lot of times our extreme negative emotion has more to do with the judgments we make about ourselves based on what we feel guilty for than it does the actual guilt. What I mean is this. You could be a person who has stolen something. Now, stealing something, you could feel that momentary pang emotion of guilt, which is causing you to know that stealing things is out of line with your higher self. But what causes you to really suffer as a result of that action is the fact that you're thinking a thought like this. People who steal things are bad people. I have stolen something, which means that I am bad. So the belief that I am bad is really what's causing you that extreme negative emotion. So try to figure out what assumptions and what judgments you're making based on the guilt which you are experiencing given what you have said or done, and take time to shift those beliefs. Those judgments and assumptions about yourself really keep you completely prisoner to the circumstance. They don't allow you to change. We may have done bad things, we may regret them now, and we may vow never to repeat them. But doing those bad things does not mean that we inherently are bad. A person's actions are different than who they really are.
Is to be able to accept them where they're at. And I'm really lucky that I have a really great set of friends that can do that for me, even when I'm feeling, like a hot mess, honestly. This road is a rewarding one, but it's not always the easiest. And so I really commend any of you who can undertake this courageously and compassionately, and any of you who can really do this authentically. Be real with yourselves and others. So, props to you. I love you. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching my ramblings, because this is just my time to just talk to you and connect with you. And I really appreciate you spending the time with me. Those of you who've been watching me for a little while.
10. Guilt is the opposite of self-love. So what should we do if we're trying to dissolve the vibration of guilt? Come up with ways to reinforce the vibration of self-love. Guilt makes us a match to doing more things and meeting more people who reinforce guilt with us. So, what do you do when this self-abusive ego is running the show with guilt? Show yourself love and care and discover how to be your own friend. Look inward and see that you are in need of loving kindness yourself. Counter that self-hate with self-love, whatever that might look like to you. That might look like taking a bath, writing affirmations, doing some mirror work, watching a movie that makes you feel good about yourself, or doing a self-love visualization. If we have problems showing our self-love, it's because we don't think we deserve it. Humans have a problem thinking they deserve anything, because we've been taught that to deserve is to be entitled. So it's understandable if you're trying to show yourself love and you have felt guilty for doing something, that it sort of feels like you're rewarding instead of punishing the bad deed that you have done. But this is not the way that the universe works vibrationally. If you're able to work yourself into a vibration of self-love, you can't do anything. You can't even be inspired towards anything that would cause you to feel guilt or cause you to cause harm on anybody else. So getting yourself into the vibration of self-love is paramount in terms of not making any mistakes that you might feel guilty for later. Step 11. Ironic number, don't you think?
That was funny. I sit down, right, to make this video after a very inspired day. Not necessarily like a happy-dappy, like fun-and-go-lucky kind of inspired day, but just a day where I've had a lot of realizations, right? And the funniest thing just happens. My best friend just calls me, like, right at 11:11, right as I'm sitting down to make this video to share with you some of the things that I've learned about today. And I'm just laughing, because this is really funny. synchronicity all over the place.
Step 11, which is the last step, is to forgive yourself. Understand that every person on this earth always makes the best decision they can, given the perspective, information, and knowledge that they have from where they are. In other words, everyone does what they think is right in the very moment. Because of the way that we are societally told to punish ourselves, we hold guilt for choices we made, given options that did not exist at the time. You cannot judge your past self based on today's expanded perspective. You also can't love yourself and not forgive yourself at the same time. You can't have a happy life and not forgive yourself. To expect to live a happy life while you're holding yourself a prisoner to guilt is the same as saying, no, it's possible to be happy even though I'm beating myself up every day. Forgiveness is the practice of making peace with where you are, thereby releasing you from the bondage which is keeping you from moving forward and from happiness. In true forgiveness, the negative emotion no longer exists. Forgiveness is letting go of what is holding you back once you are aware of it, so you can turn in the direction of what you would prefer, as well as discontinue carrying the past into the present. Every single piece of release and bliss is found in the alteration of the point of view you are holding about a subject. I'm here to tell you today that if you are able to alter your point of view that you are beating yourself up with, there will no longer be something which is beating you up. When you're able to shift your perspective relative to what you're beating yourself up with, there will not be the emotion of guilt present within your reality anymore. So ultimately, the moral of this story is, to release and let go of guilt, you have to shift your perspective relative to past events. Have a good week.